This is Jennifer Gonzalez welcoming you to episode 23 of the Cult of Pedagogy podcast. In this episode, I'm going to talk about the difference we make when we really try to pronounce our students' names correctly. I've decided to start something new this year with my podcast. I am starting to realize that some of the people who listen are mainly consuming my content through the podcast. So in other words, you haven't necessarily read much of the stuff on my website, Cult of Pedagogy. You might be like me in that you listen to podcasts when you're working out or doing household chores or driving, and this just works better for you. You just don't have a whole lot of time to sit in front of a screen. What that means is that there's a whole bunch of my stuff you'll never know about because it only exists as blog posts. So with that in mind, I'm going to occasionally go back to what I think are some of my most important blog posts, the ones I think are most worthy of people's attention, and I'm going to record expanded versions of these as podcast episodes. I will read the posts themselves as long as it makes sense to read them out loud, but I'm also going to add my own commentary too. So this is going to be the first one of that kind. I'm basing it on a post I wrote in April of 2014. The post is called "This Year, Give the Gift of Pronunciation." So when this episode comes out, there won't be a brand new blog post at the top of my website. If you want to find the original article, just go to cultofpedagogy.com/pod. Click on episode 23, and that'll take you straight to the original post, which will now have a podcast player embedded into it as well. And that will be this episode. Okay, before I get started, a quick announcement. As of this week, the Cult of Pedagogy podcast is a member of the Education Podcast Network. This is a relatively new network of podcasts that all focus on education-related topics. It includes the House of Ed Tech, Angela Watson's Truth for Teachers, and one that I just started listening to this week, and it's called Principally Speaking. I'm really liking it. In this podcast, Indiana Principal Jason Bodner has in-depth conversations with administrators and other educators about what it means to lead in education. One big focus of his podcast is helping new administrators make the transition from the classroom to positions of leadership. What I really like about it is that Jason is a really thoughtful interviewer. He listens to his guests carefully, he asks good questions, and he's not afraid to share his own weaknesses. He's a pretty honest podcaster, and I just really appreciate that. So if you're an administrator looking for insights on the work you do, try a few episodes of Principally Speaking. You can see all the podcasts on the Education Podcast Network by visiting edupodcastnetwork.com. Okay, so let's start talking about how we pronounce our students' names. I was first inspired to write this post after attending an event somewhere, and I can't even remember where now, but the person who was reading student names, this is something where when student names had to be read and they had to come up and take some sort of a certificate, and the person reading the names just really was only getting the names correctly if they were really sort of standard English language-based American names. So anything that was a little bit foreign in any way was just sometimes skipped over. Sometimes the students wouldn't even get to have their last name read, and other times they just were pretty messed up. And, I thought it was something that bothered me throughout my life, a little bit here and there, but I thought, I actually have a platform now. I can talk about this as an issue, and maybe I can reach more educators about this topic. And I did a little bit more research on it, and I learned some more things about it, and I found some tools that can help people. So the reason I chose this as my first blog post to feature as a podcast is because it didn't get read as much as I really wanted it to. And it's a message that I feel really strongly about, that one of the simplest ways that we can show respect to our students and show that we are interested in them as individuals and we recognize them as full people is to just make an effort to pronounce their names correctly or call them what they want to be called. Because I think that this goes beyond purely issues of ethnicity. I think anytime a student wants to be called something different than what you see on the paper, it's really in the same ballpark of recognizing a person for who they want you to see them as. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and read the post, and I might interrupt myself, but we shall see. Samira Fazich was used to people saying her name wrong, especially in school. She says, through the years, as roll would be called, I would wait for that awkward pause. This is how I knew I was next. I accepted this ritual. Fazich, whose family left Bosnia in the early 90s and moved to the U.S. in 1999, experienced this ritual for 10 years, and she understood that people in her new town weren't used to names like hers, despite the fact that the area's Bosnian population had grown massive in recent years. It never hurt me until high school graduation, she recalls. This was a big day for me. My grandparents came from Bosnia just to watch me get my diploma, and of course, my name was butchered. If you're in a position to say lots of student names in your classroom, over the PA system, or especially at award ceremonies and graduations, no one will be surprised if you mess up a couple of them. But this year, maybe you can do better. If you make the commitment now to get them all right, if you resolve this time to honor your students with clear, beautiful pronunciation of their full given names, that, my friend, will be the loveliest surprise of all. I grew up with a hard-to-pronounce name. Actually, it wasn't that hard. It just looked different from what people were used to. The name is Yurkosky. It's spelled Y-U-R-K-O-S-K-Y. It's a Russian name. Year after year, it threw everyone off. And the way they approached the name put them into one of three camps. And these are categories that I have made up of how people pronounce names. The first category is fumble bumblers. The second is arrogant manglers, and the third is calibrators. And I'm going to tell you what each one of those is. The fumble bumblers I didn't mind so much. They would mispronounce the name, slowing down and making their voice all wobbly and not trusting themselves. They would grimace, laugh, ask me how to say it, and then try again. But then they sort of gave up. Over the next few attempts, they'd settle into something that was a kind of approximation, and that would be that. What made me not mind these people was that they put the mispronunciation on themselves. Their demeanor suggested that the fault was with them and not with me or my name. The second category is the arrogant manglers, and they were another story. They assumed their pronunciation was correct and just plowed ahead, never bothering to check. In many cases, an arrogant mangler will persist with their own pronunciation even after they've been corrected. Now, I've got a friend. Her name is Adan Deeb. Her first name is A-D-A-N. Her family hails from Israel with Palestinian roots, and she experienced this as a middle school student in the U.S. Here's what she says. Every time I was called up to the office, every single time, they would mispronounce my name. No matter how many times I corrected them, it made me angry. To me, it shows that they just don't care enough to get my name right. So, and I'm going off script now, if you're mispronouncing a name and a student has corrected you, don't think that they don't notice, because they notice. I thought her story was powerful only because it sounds like it bothered her every single time. And so even if a student has stopped trying to correct you, I think it doesn't mean that they aren't a little bit bugged by it. Okay, so the arrogant manglers category actually has a couple of subcategories. One subcategory is what I'm calling the nicknamers. These are people who will come across a name like Rajendrani and say, we'll just call you Amy. The other is the worst kind. The people who start with the first syllable, then wave the rest of the name away like so much cigarette smoke, adding whatever your name is or just whatever. I don't have a creative name for this group. Let's just call them assholes. Finally, there is a small group I think of as the calibrators. People who recognized that my name required a little more effort. They asked me to pronounce it, tried to replicate it, then fine-tuned it a few more times against my own pronunciation. Some of them would even check back later to make sure they still had it. My cousin Laura, who has the same last name I grew up with, remembers a professor who was a true calibrator. Here's what she says. It did take him a bit of time to learn to pronounce my name, but he was always apologetic when he said it wrong and always insisted on the importance of getting such things right. He was easily the most inspirational and challenging teacher I've had. He just insisted that every student feel important. So I'm going to just go off script for a second to comment on what it really means to be a calibrator, because I think it's not easy. What you have to do is continually humble yourself in front of your students, and you have to possibly even annoy everybody else because you're kind of slowing things down instead of going for the efficiency of just, giving them a nickname and moving on. You're actually taking that extra time. And I think a lot of teachers would be nervous with that, kind of like we are with wait time, with just not liking that, that sort of, quote, waste of time. But I think demonstrating that effort is important. And I also think that there is a finesse. I think with some students, I know for me, I wouldn't necessarily want a student to be put on the spot for 5 minutes while I practiced her name over and over again in front of the class. So probably what I would do in a situation where I couldn't get it after 2 tries, I would say to them, let's talk about it after class so I can get it. And then that way we can do it in private, and we're not going to make her a sideshow where, we're all laughing at getting the name right. But what I'm doing is I'm showing the rest of my students how you respect a person's name, that you don't just brush it off and say, oh, well, weird name. I guess we'll just move on. Okay. So anyway, if you're already a calibrator, keep up the good work. If you're not, if you've let yourself off the hook with some idea like, oh, I'm just terrible with names, know that it is not too late to turn things around. And it really does matter. Although it might seem inconsequential to you, the way you handle names has deeper implications than you might realize. People's reaction to this issue varies depending on their personality. If your student has a strong desire to please and wants desperately to fit in, or is generally conflict avoidant, they may never tell you you're saying their name wrong. For those students, it might matter a lot, but they never say so. And other kids are just more laid back in general. They just say, oh, whatever, it's not that important. But for many students, the way you say their name conveys a more significant message. Name mispronunciation, especially the kind committed by the arrogant manglers, actually falls into a larger category of behaviors that is referred to as microaggressions. Microaggressions, defined by researchers at Columbia University Teachers College, are brief and commonplace daily verbal, behavioral, or environmental indignities, whether intentional or unintentional, that communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative racial slights and insults toward people of color. In other words, mutilating someone's name is a tiny act of bigotry. Whether you intend to or not, what you're communicating is this message. Your name is different. It is foreign. It is weird. It's not worth my time to get it right. Although most of your students may not know the word microaggression, they're probably familiar with that vague feeling of marginalization, the message that everyone else is normal and they are not. Now, I actually read another piece on this topic. It's called What's in a Name? Kind of a Lot. And this is by a writer whose name is Tracy Clayton, but she writes under the name Brokey McPoverty, and there is a link to it in the original blog post of mine. She just rails against Ryan Seacrest, who is a Hollywood host of a lot of things. He hosted American Idol for years and years. I guess he still does. I haven't watched it in a long time. But he also hosts like the Oscars red carpet stuff. And what he did one year, and it may have been this year, was the little girl who was in Annie, the newer version of Annie. Her name is Quvenzhané Wallis. And he told her that they had all decided to just call her Little Q because her name was too difficult to pronounce. So in this article, the writer points out that Ryan Seacrest and other media figures treat the names of some actors who happen to be white differently. And this is what she says. The problem is that white Hollywood doesn't deem her as important as, say, Renee Zellweger or Arnold Schwarzenegger or Zach Galifianakis, all of whom have names that are difficult to pronounce, but they manage. The message sent is this: you, young black female child, are not worth the time and energy it will take me to learn to spell and pronounce your name. And someone else, A guy named Mikey Glazer was also so upset by this, he created a YouTube video to actually teach people how to say Quavenjane's name correctly. And he even used diagrams. So I'm going to play the audio from that.
So tell everyone who doesn't know, what do they need to know?
This is how you say my name. Quavenjane Wallace.
One more time for the people that can't hear good.
Quavenjane Wallace.
Fantastic. Okay, here's some remedial help. Qua. Ven. Shah. Like Zsa Zsa Gabor. Nay. Wallace. One more time. Qua. Ven. Shah. Nay. Wallace. Awards presenters, red carpet reporters, and general chit-chat at parties. Get it right.
So the first syllable he's got is qua, K-W-A-H. Ven, he's drawn a picture of a Venn diagram. Zsa, he has a picture of Zsa Zsa Gabor. Nay is a horse saying neigh. So he's basically broken down all of the syllables so that people can relate them and connect them correctly. So the issue goes beyond names that are rooted in cultures unfamiliar to the speaker. And I got into this a little bit beforehand. Whatever it is your student prefers to be called, it's worth the effort to get it right. Now, I am sure I've failed in this area. I am sure I have not only mispronounced my students' names, but I've probably also called them things that were not even their preferred names. Realizing in April that the kid that I've been calling Stefan all year actually prefers to be called Jude. Now, sometimes you can pick up on this. You can hear your students calling each other something that you don't call them. Listen, because a lot of times you might be the only person that calls this kid by the name that's actually on their transcript, but no one else calls them that. One other thing about the bigotry thing that we just brought up a few minutes ago. Before you get all defensive about that, just be clear about something. Discovering that something you do might be construed as bigotry doesn't mean anyone is calling you a bigot. It's just an opportunity to grow, an opportunity to understand that doing something a little differently shows others that you respect them. At some point in your life, someone probably taught you to hold the door open for the person coming in behind you. Before then, maybe you didn't know. Opportunity to grow. It's that simple. So here are some tools that can help you actually get students' names right. Make it a little easier. Best way is to just ask them. Pull the kid aside and say, you know what? I think I've been messing your name up all year and I'm sorry. Now that graduation is coming, I want to say it perfectly. Can you teach me? By humbling yourself in this way, you let them see that you're human. You're modeling what it looks like to be a lifelong learner, a flexible, confident person who is not afraid to admit a mistake. So regardless of the outcome, a genuine effort on your part will mean so much. And when the big day comes, that kid might even root for you to get it right. If you have hundreds of names to learn, just get systematic. Starting now, carry around a clipboard with all the names you'll need to say, even those you think you already know, and start checking in with kids in the cafeteria, in the halls, in the stands at a basketball game, and write down what they tell you. When the big day comes, the page of names you read should look something like this, and I've got a diagram there. On the left side is the names as they are spelled just on paper, but to the right of each name is just a really creative phonetic pronunciation. So the first name I've got written there is Niev Doherty. Niev or Neve, people say it two different ways, is spelled N-I-A-M-H. For me, it is one of those Irish names that when I see it, I'm just like, whoa, how on earth am I supposed to say this name? You look it up or you ask them. So next to it, I've written N-E-E-V, Neve. Doherty is spelled D-O-U-G-H-E-R-T-Y. That's another one I've always had trouble with. But to the right of that, Doherty, D-O-C-K, like a dock by, water. And then and then T, T-E-E, Doherty. Perfect. I never even have to look over to the left anymore. I just look at my pronunciation. So you just give yourself whatever clues you have to spell it right or to pronounce it right. If you run out of time to ask students, or if doing that is just too uncomfortable for you, you can also get some help online. There is a website called Hear Names. URL is just hearnames.com, HEARNAMES.com. No hyphen, nothing. This website is genius. You just enter a name, you press search, and then you get this little recorder where a voice of a person who is a native speaker in the language of that, where that name comes from, will pronounce the name for you. Now, of course, they don't have every single name in the world, but they have quite a few of them. And they've also got them broken down by country. So, and by language, they've got Vietnamese names and they've got Russian names and they've got, I think let me see, let me look at it real quick. Korean names, Palestinian names, Turkish names, Thai names. So lots and lots of ethnicities are represented here. And so you just type in a name. I'm going to go ahead and type in a name that I remember seeing a lot when I was a teacher in Maryland. It's spelled Nguyen. Never knew how to say it. I asked people, I said, I got to the point where I was saying Nguyen. But when I listen to it on Hear Names, it sounds a little bit different. Let me play it for you.
Nguyen.
So when I hear this is how I can become a calibrator. I can hear that. I can go back and ask the student. I can get it until I get it pretty close to what sounds about right. And I really think that a lot of these students who have more unusual names in the culture that they're in, I personally think that any effort at all will be so much more appreciated than the teacher just giving up, or substituting something anglicized. Whatever you do, do something. For some students, you may be the first person who ever bothered. If the only time you say their name is in the classroom, your correct pronunciation will help the whole class learn it too. Eventually, that will ripple through the school, making that student feel known in a place where before they felt unknown. And if you have the honor of announcing them on the day they receive their award, their diploma, the day that marks some big achievement, you have a unique opportunity to make it even more special, but you only have 2 seconds. Make it count. It's a gift they'll remember for a long time. To read this post, to link to the resources that I talked about, to watch the video of Convention A. Wallace, to read the article by Brokey McPoverty, just go to cultofpedagogy.com/pod, click on episode 23, and it'll send you straight over to the full article. I am so appreciative that you are here listening and that you've gotten all the way here to the end of the episode. If you are enjoying this podcast, please go and visit it on iTunes and leave me a rating and a review, because that helps other people find it. And if and when you are ready to take your earbuds out and do something besides listen, if you would like to read other articles and take advantage of all the videos and other materials that I have, please come on over and visit cultofpedagogy.com. I have all kinds of stuff there for people who are obsessed with education. Thank you so much for listening. Have a fantastic day. This podcast is a proud member of the Education Podcast Network. Podcasts for educators, podcasts by educators. To learn more, visit edupodcastnetwork.com.